O sincerity, thou Astrea, that hast fled from earth to heaven, how mayst thou, the basis of conscience, and hence of all religion, be drawn thence to us again? I can admit, though it is much to be deplored, that candor, in speaking the whole truth which one knows, is not to be found in human nature. But we must be able to demand sincerity, that all that one says be said with truthfulness. And indeed, if there were in our nature no predisposition to sincerity, whose cultivation merely is neglected, the human race must needs be, in its own eyes, an object of the deepest contempt. Immanuel Kant. Through several months and several lectures, I've now talked about pretty much every aspect of Kant's moral philosophy. I've talked about what is his foundation for morality, about how, according to Kant, what counts is not the consequence of our actions, but the goodwill out of which we act. How about, according to Kant, morality is not about the good heart, not about compassion, empathy, and such things, but rather it is about having a good character. So, not your mode of sense, as Kant calls it, so that which nature made you, but rather your mode of thinking, that which you make yourself. I talked about what is the moral law, what is the famous categorical imperative in its three formulas, what does it say? I talked about the specific duties, the moral duties that we have, and how Kant categorizes them twofold. For one, into duties of wide, narrow duties and wider duties. And on the other hand, into duties that we have towards others and duties that we have towards ourselves. Now, there is, however, one specific moral duty that I still want to address and that deserves its own lecture, and that is the duty of truthfulness. Or, if you want to put it negatively, it is the prohibition of lying, which is extremely important to Kant. And he is quite famous or infamous for that, right? Even if you don't know much about Kant, you might have heard that Kant forbids lying in all instances, and that he does so even if the lying could save a life, right? There's this infamous little essay by Kant where he deals with the example of a would-be murderer whose victim is in his own house or maybe in your house, but either way you are there down at the door and the victim's maybe upstairs in the house, and the murderer asks you if the victim is home. And most people would, of course, say, well, we should lie. We should say, no, he's not home, so that the murderer leaves. But Kant says, no, even in this instance, it is actually immoral to lie. And this nowadays gets criticized a lot. Which, by the way, maybe says more about our time than about Kant. In his own day, while not everyone agreed with it, otherwise he wouldn't have had to even write that essay, maybe. It certainly was not the main point of criticism. It certainly was not such a big deal to people, but we live in more dishonest times that take lying much more lightly. But very often this is taken by people who have not even dealt with Kant's moral philosophy much. Maybe they have not even read that little essay, just heard about it. Very often this is used by people to completely dismiss Kant, to say, oh, his moral philosophy is way too strict, way too rigorous, it's unrealistic, this is this lofty theory, but it has nothing to do with real life. Kant even says that you mustn't lie even if you could save a life. What kind of moral theory is that? And that is, of course, not an argument. That's pathetic. That's completely unphilosophical and unaufklärt. Lichtenberg, who was a thinker in Germany in the same time as Kant. He was an important physicist, but also did more philosophical writings. He and Kant quite liked and respected one another, exchanged some letters. Lichtenberg once said, when a book and a head collide and it makes an empty sound, is that sound necessarily coming from the book? In other words, such disagreement, not just with Kant, but with any philosopher, is completely worthless. Because all people are saying basically is, oh, what Kant says goes against our sentiments. What Kant says goes against the stuff that we have talked so far. It goes against our opinions that we held up to this point. But that statement is completely uninteresting. What do I care whether your opinions that you held up to this point are in agreement or disagreement with Kant? The question is, what is right? And since Aufklärung is mostly about self-reflection, self-criticism, you should, especially when it's a great mind like Kant, not saying that they can never be wrong, but their statements, their positions should at least be carefully considered. What if it is actually you, with your current morality of the day that everyone holds today? What if it is actually our age that is wrong and Kant that is right? And indeed, I will add that it is not only Kant, even though he may be most infamous for that, it is not only Kant who is so adamant about not lying. It is every proper moral philosopher. I mean, the same could be said about Fichte. Same could be said about me. I will go so far as to say, if your moral theory does not treat lying as the most grave sin there is, as worse than murder and everything, then it is no moral theory at all. Then it's something else. It's probably a theory of happiness, eudaimonism, how to lead a good life, but it is not a theory of actual morality, of actually being good. And I will also say, if a so-called philosopher is not categorically against lying, then you don't need to deal with him. He's not a real philosopher. Maybe what he has to say is nice sounding, interesting sounding sophistry, but it is not worth your time. If he is not guided, first and foremost, by his love for truth, then why would anything that he says be true, except maybe by accident? So, Kant is absolutely right. This is the most important moral commandment. Do not lie. But the question is why? And this is what I want to talk about here. And once again, you need to be, in order to be an aufklärt person, you need to be unprejudiced. You need to use Kant's skeptical method, which I discussed in its own lecture. That is, you need to not come into something already having made your judgment, but being open, being willing to hear out someone, to consider the arguments, the evidence, and only then make your judgment. Now, before I get into why lying is so terrible, I first want to make clear what Kant's actual position is, actually. Because there are some misunderstandings that people could have. First of all, Kant says there is a duty to be truthful. That does not mean that there is a duty to be open. In other words, you don't have to tell everyone everything. You can refuse to make a statement at all, right? This is also important when it comes to this example with the murderer, right? People always treat it like the only two options you have are either lying to him, saying, no, the person you want to murder is not here, so go away, or telling the truth, saying, yes, he's here, so please, and stepping aside and saying, please go inside and kill him. But those are not your only two options, right? I mean, when he asks you, is the person I want to murder here, you could also say, that's none of your business. Murdering is wrong, and I will not help you in murdering. And you can fight the murderer even. You can try to disarm him and to get him arrested. So this is important. Kant says that, not without lamenting it, but he often says, since human beings are largely bad, we mustn't always tell them everything, and it's probably not smart to say everything that you think. Maybe it's better to keep some things to yourself. That is not immoral. The duty is just that what you say should be truthful. But that does not mean that, on the other hand, you have to say everything that is the truth. The second thing that I must make clear, Kant also doesn't say that we have a duty to say the truth. We have a duty to be truthful. That's not the same thing. A duty to always say the truth, to never say something that is untrue, would be absurd. Because we could only fulfill that duty if we were all knowing, like God. As human beings, we can go wrong. So maybe we hold an opinion, we think that something is true, when actually it isn't true. That does, of course, not make us liars. Kant would say that every statement we make must be true practically, not necessarily logically. You see in Kant, when he says logically, maybe today we would rather say theoretically, when he says logically, this is always connected to the faculty of cognition. So it is connected to questions of right or wrong, in the sense of true or untrue. While practically is always related to our actions, to what we do. And then third, between those two, there is aesthetically, which is always connected to sensations, to feelings. So what Kant says is, my statements don't necessarily have to be true logically, they have to be true practically. That is, I have to make a truthful action in stating them, because I believe that what I say is true, but logically it might actually be untrue, because I might be wrong. Here I remind you how Kant defines truth. I discussed that in much earlier lectures on Kant's methods and on Kant's theoretical philosophy. It's not a definition specific to Kant. It was the definition already used by the logicians of his time. Kant says the truth is a representation conforming to its object. What that means is, I have a certain representation in my mind. Let's say a thought. And that representation has an object, something which it is about. And it is true if the corresponding object in the world is the same as the representation. So let's say I say my t-shirt is wet. Now I have a representation in my head. I'm thinking of a wet t-shirt. And this is true if the object of that representation, that is the actual t-shirt, which is not in my head, which is outside here, if that is actually wet. If the object and the representation are alike, then we have truth. Now, Kant would say truthfulness, on the other hand, is about the representation not aligning with the object, but rather aligning with the subject. That is, with me, who has this representation and who makes this statement. So, again, the statement, I am wearing a red t-shirt, it is true if the object which it is about, the t-shirt, is actually red, and it is truthful if the subject which makes this statement actually believes that the t-shirt is red. Maybe the t-shirt actually isn't red, maybe it's green, and for some reason I can't tell red and green apart, but as long as I believe that it's red, then the statement is truthful. Moving on to the third and last clarification, and that is that Kant is not pedantic. He is often accused of that. His moral rigorism is often confused with pedantry, but it is actually not the same. The rigorism, which I already addressed in its own lecture, the lecture is Kant's moral philosophy too strict and unrealistic, that is about the moral law itself. Kant says the moral law that we think of should be as strict, as holy, as demanding as possible. We should demand a lot of us. Maybe we will not be able to meet the demand, which only means that we will always have to keep working on ourselves, to keep trying to become better people. But if we already make the law itself lax and relenting and easy to fulfill, if the law itself makes no real demands of us, then all we have done is create an excuse to never try to be better. Create an excuse for complacency, for already being satisfied with us, for already thinking we are doing good enough. So the rigorism is about the law itself. That needs to be rigorous. Now, pedantry, which is something that Kant often talks about and often criticizes, is about the application of a general rule to a specific case. You are pedantic if you lack judgment, if your power of judgment doesn't work right and you can't judge properly if the rule needs to strictly be applied in this case, or if this is a case where maybe you need to make an exception from a rule or something. So Kant is actually not saying that you mustn't ever lie. Or, I mean, he's saying that, but he's not saying that you mustn't ever say something untrue which you know to be untrue. Not every untrue statement is a lie to him. So, one example would be politeness. Right? To be polite, you have lots of things you are expected to say which might not be quite true. So, for example, in German, when you write a letter, not when you write a letter to a friend or family member, but like to somebody you don't know, someone official or whatever, like in the capacity of your job, or you are writing to some government agency or whatever. You start the letter with very honored Mr. or very honored Mrs. Now, very often this is a lie, because you don't really honor that person you are writing to very much. Maybe you don't even know that person, like you're just writing a letter to your insurance company. You don't know who will read it. Certainly not someone whom you very much honor. And in Kant's day, I mean, in English, let's say, for example, you start your letter with dear Mr. So and so. This too is, in the strictest sense, a lie, right? Probably not every person who gets addressed like that is actually dear to you. And in Kant's day, this was much more extreme, at least in Germany. He says that Germany could be called the land of titles, or the country of titles, because there were so many titles and polite phrases and ways to address people that you were expected to use. Like when you read letters from the time, like for example Kant's own letters or the letters he received, you would address people as "you're well-born" or "you're high well-born," and then you would close off a letter by saying "I remain your humble servant" or something like that. This was probably not true in many cases, right? You were probably not that person's humble servant, and not your whole life would revolve around serving that person's every wish. But the thing is, Kant also, he was not a fan of that. He said that the Germans, they use too many different titles, too many ways of address. The language should be more simple, more straightforward, like other European languages are. But still, it was what it was, and he did participate in that. He did write his letters like you were expected, like it was polite at the time. So you could now accuse Kant of having lied to people when he, for example, said, "I remain your humble servant." But Kant would not consider those things lies, because he says everyone knows that it's not true. It's not like anyone is getting tricked by this. It's not like anyone will expect to really be honored by that other person, or to really be dear to that other person, or for that other person to really be his servant. Like, it would be ridiculous if you took these phrases seriously. And Kant is not just not against such politeness. Like, he's not so pedantic about not lying that he says you mustn't do this, you mustn't say these things. He even says it has its place and it can be a good thing. Because while it is not moral, I mean, even a evil, rotten person can use such phrases, um, it at least gives an appearance of decency, of decorum, of humanity, of regard for the other person. And the illusion over time can maybe become real if someone is surrounded by people who might not actually be better people than him, but who act because they are so polite, because they are so decent, who act like they were good people. um, he may come to think that everyone is good, or he may come to think that at least you should be good, at least it should be expected to be good, and that might improve his own morality, Kant says. So he's not against such things, and he does not consider this lying. Likewise, when you lie in a playful manner, like for a game, right? Like there are certain card games where you are actually expected to lie about which cards you were dealt. Or the example Kant uses is April Fools, which was something that existed already back in his day. And I mean, this is lying, right? You lie to somebody. Uh, but Kant would say that no one is really fooled by this. At least the fooling does not last, and at least it's not meant to really trick somebody into doing something that he normally wouldn't do for your own purposes. So maybe we could introduce a distinction that Kant himself does not make, at least not in these words, but that Nietzsche makes between the aesthetical and the moral lie. So, to Nietzsche, if you lie for some sort of play, for a playing purpose, or for an art purpose, right? I mean, art is also a form of lying, you could say, right? The actor who pretends to be in love probably doesn't really love that actress, right? Or the poet who tells you a story, a novel, um, talks of things that never happened. But those are not lies. No one is usually fooled by that. No one expects it to be true. It's just a sort of game. And you could say that the aesthetical lie is permitted, it is just a moral lie. And moral lie, in the way Nietzsche uses it, does not mean that the lie as such is moral, it means lie in a moral sense. It means that the lie is actually immoral, of course. It is this moral lie which is not allowed. So, Kant would say it's not speaking an untruth which is forbidden under all conditions. It is the spirit of untruthfulness. It is the intent of fooling others and tricking others and deceiving others, which is actually evil and which should not be done. But now, with this out of the way, and with Kant's position specified a bit more, what is actually the reason why we shouldn't lie? Well, for one, Kant is of course opposed to any sort of consequentialism. Consequentialism would be a moral theory that says morality is about the consequences of our actions. Do the action which has the best consequences. The most well known form of consequentialism would be utilitarianism, which says do whatever brings forth the greatest happiness for the greatest number, or prevent the greatest pain for the greatest number. I already discussed this in its own lecture. I talked about the goodwill, how Kant says morality is about the goodwill, not about the consequence, because the consequence is not always in our hand. We cannot always calculate correctly if the consequence will be good or bad. We can only try. And I also talked about this in the lecture on why morality is not about the consequences of our actions. And there I already said that you can actually not know if lying to the would-be murderer will have good consequences or not. I need not repeat that here. You can listen to that other lecture. But what I will say here is that such a moral theory is downright evil. It opens the door for evil. These lies that are allegedly for a good cause, like saving a life, in English you would probably usually call them white lies. In German we say Notlüge, which means emergency lie, right? So the claim is that it is an emergency, and because of the emergency you are allowed to lie. But let me ask you this. Why should this go only for lying and not for all moral laws? If you say that in case of emergency you are allowed to do something immoral, why should that immoral act necessarily be lying? If there are emergency lies, then why wouldn't there be emergency robbery or emergency murder? There's no good reason why there couldn't be. Like, if you allow, even in one single case, and it doesn't matter how much sense this case makes to you, like, it may sound like it makes a lot of sense. Oh, we can save a life through just a little lie. Then, of course, in this case, it's okay to lie. But if you allow, in just one case, an objectively evil act in the name of a greater good, then you allow it in every case. Then you have said that we can always make exceptions from the moral law for some greater good. And the issue is, by that, you have destroyed the moral law. I mean, in that case, there is no universal moral law anymore that binds us all, to which we all have to submit. But rather, now you leave the judgment to each person's arbitrary choice. Now each person is his own judge, his own private lawgiver. Each person can choose for himself if he thinks that in this case there's an emergency which allows him to do evil. And in fact, if you look around in the world, that's exactly what's happening, right? I mean, no one wants the moral law gone in general. Pretty much everyone wants the moral law to be in place generally. Even the evil people want it, right? Like, even the murderer probably think it's a good thing that murder is not common. He probably doesn't want to get murdered himself. He doesn't want his family, his loved ones to be murdered, his friends. He probably doesn't even want random people to be murdered, right? Like, he wouldn't want to live in a society that breaks down in total chaos because everyone is murdering each other. All he's doing is making an exception in one case. And probably he has a reason, which at least he thinks is a good reason. Probably it is some emergency, at least in his mind, right? No matter what it might be. Maybe his wife cheated on him and he thinks that's a good reason to murder her and the guy that she cheated with. Why not? Okay, maybe you think that's not a good reason, but now it's his judgment against yours. If there's no general universal moral law, who's to say who's right and who's wrong? Or maybe think of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Maybe he's like Raskolnikov, who thinks it's okay to murder an old woman and to steal her money because he thinks that woman is worthless anyways, while he is such a great, valuable human being who can if he just gets that money and survives, who can still contribute to humanity. That's an emergency. Or maybe they are like the Israelis currently, who probably also would say in general that you shouldn't murder and so on, but who think that they are in an emergency, right? October the 7th was an emergency, and now they are just defending themselves against 4-year-old children. If it's left to everyone's individual judgment, who's to say what is and what isn't an emergency? So, better to have a strict, categorical, rigorous moral law that tells you this is your duty under every circumstances, and there is no justification for ever going against it. And hopefully you start getting a sense for how consequentialism, how evil it actually is. Utilitarianism is actually not a theory of morality. Usually it's claimed that it is. Usually, like when you watch some videos here on YouTube about utilitarianism, they will tell you it's a theory of morality, even if you study at the university, because most of the professors there know nothing of philosophy, of course. You will be told that it is a theory of morality. It is not. It's not even a wrong theory of morality, it simply isn't. It is a theory of immorality. Utilitarianism is in fact just a justification for evil. Usually they will say, the utilitarians themselves say that, that utilitarianism is about the highest good. It is about creating the greatest happiness. But if you think about it critically, and if you break it down from the perspective of morality, what utilitarianism actually is the theory that it is okay, in the name of the highest good, in the name of happiness, to sometimes be immoral. Utilitarianism says morality doesn't matter. What matters is happiness. And those are not the same thing. I talked about this in my lecture on the imperatives, how Kant says there are two possible practical principles. There's eudaimonism, which is about happiness, and then there's eleutheronomy, which is about free lawgiving, that is, it is about morality. It's not the same thing. And to the eudaimonist, morality may be a tool to achieve happiness. Like maybe in some cases, the moral action is actually the action which will create the greatest happiness. And so in that case, you should do the moral action. But not because it is the moral action, not because it is the right thing to do, but only because it creates happiness. But if morality is just a tool, of course you don't use the tool in a case where the tool would defeat the actual purpose, because it's just a tool. What matters is the purpose. So if acting morally, like not lying or not murdering or whatever, according to your judgment, will not lead to happiness in some instance, you will of course not do it. So again, utilitarianism is not a moral theory at all. It is the theory that tells you morality does not matter, only happiness does, and you should only be moral if it leads to happiness, if it is a good tool for happiness. But in instances where acting immoral will create greater happiness, you should actually break the moral law and not follow it. Now, with this said, you should not misunderstand this as if Kant's reason to be against lying was a consequentialist reason, right? Because that's what I've been saying so far, right? I've basically been saying that allowing lies, allowing white lies, allowing emergency lies would have bad consequences. I've been saying that maybe in the specific instance where you lie, it might actually have a good consequence. Maybe you even save a life through the lie. But in the grand scheme of things, all things considered, it actually has more bad consequences than good consequences to allow lies, because it means allowing exceptions from the moral law in general, however people see fit. Now, this is certainly true. I've said this before, even if you are a consequentialist, you should not be a consequentialist, because consequentialism actually, if you think it through, has very bad consequences. And indeed, Kant would say that the consequence of lying is an evil world. He says that the highest good cannot be realized as long as there's one single liar left. The highest good is very important in Kant's thinking. It is what connects his moral philosophy with his philosophy of religion. I will address it in a later lecture, but basically, the highest good would be a world of both happiness and virtue, right? Because if you only have one of those two, that's not good. Like if you had a world where everyone was virtuous, everyone was a good person, but people constantly suffered, even though being good people, they would not deserve to suffer, that would not be a good world. On the other hand, if you had a world where people were happy without deserving it, where even the evil people were happy, that would also not be a good world. The good world would be one where the happiness and being worthy of happiness would actually be in accordance with one another. And Kant says this highest good, which we should strive for, this is what morality is about, trying to contribute to realizing the highest good. The highest good cannot be realized as long as there's one liar left. I mean, the whole problem is the distrust in the world, right? Everyone, even the evil person, can probably understand that even from a selfish perspective, it would be better if everyone was good. That would also serve my own selfish purposes best. So let's take the example of war. Every country, every people should understand that a world without war would be best. So it would be best if all countries completely disarmed, if all armies were dissolved, if we just had world peace, right? The problem is, of course, that we cannot trust each other. No single country is gonna start and just gonna say, oh, a world without weapons, without armies would be a better world, so I will abolish my army. Because the problem is, the other countries probably won't, and you can't trust the other countries to not take advantage of you having dissolved your army, right? So, therefore, one single liar kind of ruins things for everyone. So, yes, from a consequentialist perspective, lying is terribly bad. But still, you should not think that it is just for consequentialist reasons that Kant is against lying. I mean, that would be kind of self-contradictory, right? To say it is bad to think of the consequences in morality, and then to just say it is bad because it has bad consequences. So I consider this an important argument against the consequentialists to show how they are inconsistent with themselves, but it is actually not the main argument against lying as such. Well, let us first ask, what kind of duty is the duty of truthfulness? Unfortunately, this is asked very rarely when Kant is discussed and also when Kant is criticized, which just again shows you how superficial and how unphilosophical that criticism is usually. And I'm not even talking about just laymen, even amongst so-called scholars, even on so-called papers that get published in some journals, often what I'm missing is a clear discussion of what kind of duty that is. But let me remind you that according to Kant, there are 4 kinds of duties. There are duties towards others and towards myself. And each of those can either be a narrow or a wider duty. And so the first thing we should always ask when Kant talks about a specific duty, and this should go without question really, if you understand anything about Kant, the first thing to ask should be, into which of these 4 categories does it fall? Well, let's first start with the division of narrow and wide duties. I talked about this in my lecture on the morality of reverence and the morality of love. And clearly, not lying is one of the narrow duties to Kant. It is one of the duties of right. I discussed in that other lecture how you can tell by using the categorical imperative, how you can tell whether something is a narrow or a more wide duty. I said there that you can go by the first formula of the categorical imperative, for example, the most well-known one, the one that says you should only act according to a maxim through which you can also want for it to become a universal law, which means that the maxim, that is the subjective principle of your action, you should ask yourself, what if everyone acted according to this maxim? What if it was everyone's principle of action? What kind of world would we get out of that? What if it was a natural law, even if people had to act in this manner? And I explained in the lecture on the morality of reverence and the morality of love that if such a world would be possible but not wantable, then we are dealing with a wider duty. But if such a world would not be possible, that is, if my evil maxim, if it were to become universal, would defeat itself and become impossible, then I'm dealing with a narrow duty. In that lecture, I gave the example of stealing, right? I said that, for example, helping someone is a wider duty. Let's say there's an emergency, a car crash or something, and someone is hurt, and you see it, but you just pass and don't help him. That is, of course, an immoral action, but you have just spoken with a wider duty, because a world where everyone acted like that, like if nobody ever helped when somebody else has an emergency, such a world would at least be possible. But you yourself probably don't want to live in such a world, because what if you get into an emergency? But if you are a thief, if you steal, then you cannot just not want for everyone to become a thief. It would not be possible for everyone to become a thief. Because stealing means taking someone's property and making it yours, making it your possession. But if everyone always stole, there would be no possessions, and then you could no longer steal. Stealing would make no sense, right? If you steal someone's car, you probably want it to be your car now that you drive around with. If you knew that it would just be stolen from you the moment you leave the car, you would not bother stealing it in the first place. Nor would the person that you steal the car from have ever bought the car if he knew it would just get stolen right away. So there would be no car to steal, and stealing it would also make no sense, right? Or why would you rob a bank for the money when everyone steals? the money would just get stolen from you again. Or even if it wouldn't, what would you do with the money? Go to some store, try to buy something with it? Why would they take their money knowing that the next second somebody could steal the money from them? So if stealing was a universal law, there would be no property, and then it would become impossible to steal. Well, Kant says, the same is true if lying became a universal law. It would no longer be possible to lie, because lying is only possible as an exception. Lying requires that the person you lie to believes that you are saying the truth, right? I mean, let's consider the example with the murderer again. The murderer asks you, is my victim home? You can only say, no, he's not home, and thereby make the murderer turn around and walk away if the murderer believes you. But in a world where it is clear that everyone always lies when it serves their goals, the murderer will not bother asking you because he will expect to be lied to. So the murderer would just go inside and look for himself, right? And this is true in all such instances. Like Kant has been criticized for this, especially in the last decades after the Second World War, because, of course, the example has been applied to the Nazi times. People have asked, oh, what if you're hiding a Jew in your basement and now the Gestapo comes and asks if you're hiding a Jew? But here too, I can say, people think it would be morally good to lie and say, no, there's no Jew here. But if it is morally good, it means that everyone should do it. But if everyone were to do it, the Gestapo would just expect it. Why should they bother even asking? They could just go into your basement and check for themselves. And this, of course, by the way, does not mean that you should not have saved Jews. But, I mean, there's many other things that could be done. I mean, the Nazis should have stopped before they even rose to power or before they even started their genocide, right? But anyway, this is the problem. Kant would say, if lying became a universal law, like this is even worse than stealing becoming a universal law. This is even less possible, if you can say that something is even less possible than impossible, because this would destroy reason itself. Because everything that we say would become meaningless, right? You're right now listening to me talking about Kant. You expect me to be truthful. I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm saying that I've read everything there is to read of Kant. I've read all 29 volumes of Kant's works. That's a claim I make. What if I'm lying? You are listening to me, trusting that this is true, trusting that I know what I talk about. And trusting that, I mean, even if I have read all of Kant indeed, I could still lie about it, right? Maybe I'm telling you completely wrong things about Kant. Maybe Kant actually isn't against lying and I'm just pretending he is. Right? If you can't trust me to say the truth here, then why would you listen to me? Then you're wasting your time listening to me, and these whole lectures would become pointless. Or if I tell my wife I love you, she expects this to be true. What if we couldn't trust each other anymore? What if everything could be a lie? Maybe I'm just lying to her, maybe I just want to get her in bed with me. So speech itself would become pointless if lying was a universal law. If everyone always lied whenever it serves their goals, we might as well just grunt at each other. And without speech, there is no reason. I mean, if you think about it, speech and reason are directly connected. You cannot really imagine a being which has speech without reason. I mean, real speech, not like a parrot repeating some words, but actually being able to like have real conversations. And on the other hand, you cannot imagine a rational being which is not capable of speech. Not necessarily vocalized speech. Like, of course, a rational being could be mute. Maybe there are some alien species which have reason, but they don't speak words. Maybe they communicate in sign language, or maybe they communicate through smells, like they send off some hormones and that's their speech or whatever. I don't know. But there must be some sort of communication. Kant would say that we require pluralism. I mean, you cannot even develop your rationality without other people, right? A baby, if it's not spoken to, if it never hears anyone speaking, could not grow into a thinking, conscious human being. And then how would you check your ideas, your beliefs, unless you're talking to others and seeing if they make sense to other intellects too? We need communication, we need pluralism. And if the lie became a universal law, if speech became meaningless, our reason would be destroyed. Therefore, it is clearly a narrow duty, the most narrow duty, if you could rank them, to not lie. But of course, you could also go with the second formula of the categorical imperative. I've given individual lectures on all the three formulas. The second formula that says always act in such a manner that you treat humanity, both in your own person and in that of others, as a purpose in itself and never as a mere means to another purpose, to another ends. Here the distinction between narrow and wide duties is that a wide duty is about furthering somebody else's purpose, while a narrow duty is about not reducing somebody else to a means to your purpose. So if you pass a beggar and you give him money, so the duty of charity is a wider duty, because if you give him money, you have helped him achieve his own purposes, like buying food or whatever. If you pass him without doing that, okay, you have not helped him. Maybe that is cold-hearted. Maybe you have not done your duty of charity and generosity, but at least you have not hurt his rights. But if you not just not give charity to the beggar, but instead rob the beggar, take what little money he has gotten in his little cup or whatever, then not only have you not contributed to his purposes, rather you have used him as a mere means to serve your own purposes. Well, here too it is clear that lying is a narrow duty. Not lying is a narrow duty, right? Because if you lie to someone, you objectify and instrumentalize that person. You make that person do an action that he doesn't want to do, because you make him think that he's doing another action than the one he's actually doing, right? Like if you trick a person for his money, maybe you tell a person, give me your money and in return I will give you something that you want. Then the person thinks that he is engaged in a trade, in an exchange, right? He thinks not that he's gifting money to you, but rather that he's buying something. He thinks he's giving money in order to receive some object, some merchandise that he wants. But if you now just take the money and run away with it, what you have actually made him do is gift you the money as a present, which is not what he wanted to do, right? If you had been truthful and if you had just said, I will give you nothing, but please give me your money. I would like that gift very much. He would probably not have done it. And this, of course, even goes for the murderer, right? You are, by lying, you're making the murderer do something which he didn't mean to do. That is, let his victim go. What he thinks is that he's walking away to look for the victim elsewhere, to kill him elsewhere. But what he's actually doing is letting his victim go, which is not what he planned to do. So if you lie to someone, you are making them do action A when they actually wanted to do action B. And they think that action A is action B, but it isn't because you lied. So you turned somebody into an object, into an instrument that serves your purposes. Like when you trick somebody for his money, basically you've turned that person into an ATM, right? It's as if the human being is an automaton for you. Like with the automaton, you just have to press the right buttons and then it does what you want. For example, giving you money. Likewise, with the human being, if you press the right buttons, that is, if you tell the right lie, if you sell the right story, the human being might also do what you want him to do. But he's a free being. He has autonomy. He should do what he himself wants to do, not what you want him to do. So clearly, we are dealing with a narrow duty. And that means that it must come first before the wider duty. I explained that in the lecture on the morality of reverence and love, on the perfect and imperfect duties, that to Kant the perfect duties always come first. The imperfect duties are still duties. You should always try to follow them, but not at the expense of the perfect duties. That is, you should help people, you should do charity, you should be generous, but not if it involves harming people's rights. Respecting, having reverence for the rights of people always comes first, and only if that is done and within the boundaries of not harming anyone's rights, you can still do good acts. Only then should you do those good acts. In that other lecture, I talked about the famous trolley problem, right? Where you have a trolley on some track about to run over 5 people. And the only way to save them is to redirect the trolley onto another track. But on the other track, there's one other person which is now going to die. Now, the consequentialists, the utilitarians, who always calculate what brings the greater happiness, to them this seems like a clear case. They will say, oh, either 5 people die or 1 person dies. But what they miss, because they only look at the consequence, at the outcome, they don't look at the actual action, what they miss is, in one case, 5 people die. In the other case, 1 person is murdered. It's not the same. Of course, in general, you have a duty to save these 5 people. So if there was no one on the other track, of course you should redirect the trolley. But saving them is a wider duty. If you don't save them, you have not murdered them, right? It was, so to say, fate that they were run over by the trolley. I mean, if you had never come along at all, if you had never been there to potentially save them, they would still have died. You have just failed to save them. You have failed to serve their purposes because, let's assume their purpose is they want to stay alive, but you have not actively harmed their rights. But if you redirect the trolley, that other person, you are now actively killing. If you had not come along, he would not have died. He is now dead by your hands. You murdered him, meaning you reduced him to an instrument to save these other people's lives. And that is not okay. You should save their lives if you can, but not if it involves harming the rights, in this case the right to live, of another. And well, this is also true for lying. If lying is, if the prohibition against lying is amongst the narrow duties, then you cannot lie to save someone's life, right? It now is perfectly consistent with Kant's whole moral philosophy. Kant would say, of course, when the would-be murderer asks you, is my victim home? Of course, you do have a wider duty to save the victim's life, but it is a wider duty. If you don't save him, if you let him be murdered, you have just failed to help. But you have not actively harmed his rights. You have not murdered him yourself. Again, if you had not been there at all, if the murderer could not have asked you, is my victim home or not, the murderer would probably just have checked himself and would have killed the victim. So it's not your active doing that he killed the victim. But if you lie to the murderer, that is something you actually did. Here you have actually harmed a right, and that you mustn't ever do. And I know unclear people, they have a hard time thinking consistently. Their thinking does not form a coherent system, but rather they think in pieces. Their thoughts are an aggregate. They don't fit together, and these people don't even realize it. It's easy to say, oh, you should be allowed to lie to save a life. It's easy to say Kant is wrong here. But you should acknowledge that Kant is a systematic and architectonic thinker, and that within his moral philosophy, this makes perfect sense. So you cannot just dismiss this one detail because you don't like it. If you accept that there are wider and more narrow moral duties, and if you accept that the narrow duties must always come first, and if you accept that lying is amongst the narrow and not the wider duties, then you have to accept that you cannot lie in this scenario. The only way you can disagree here is if you dismiss Kant's moral philosophy as a whole. But it would be completely unphilosophical to just dismiss a part that you don't like when that part is perfectly consistent and necessary within the whole. But anyways, so it should be clear that we are dealing with a narrow duty. But now what remains is the other division. The division into duties towards other people and duties towards myself. And this one is probably even more interesting because most people might naively think, well, this is clearly a duty towards others, right? I should not lie to others. If I do, then I'm harming them in some way. But actually, I mean, this might be true partially. Of course, it's also a duty towards others in many cases to not lie to them. But actually, what Kant makes clear is that first and foremost, this is one of the duties towards yourself. This is about the rights of your own humanity, and this is about having reverence for yourself. And you are not so much necessarily harming the other person when you lie to him, but rather you are harming your own humanity. Kant says that by lying to someone, you are at least not necessarily doing an injustice to them. I mean, it would of course be absurd if we go back to the scenario with the murderer. If you indeed lied to the murderer and said, no, your would-be victim is not here, and then the murderer went away, and for that reason the victim escaped him, and at a later point the murderer learned about this, it would be absurd if he now complained, oh, you, by lying to me, you did me an injustice. You robbed me of my right to murder that person. No, in this case, the murderer's rights or the would-be murderer's rights have not been harmed. I already discussed in a previous lecture that Kant generally says, by doing evil to the evil person, we are not really doing an injustice to that evil person. No one can complain if he is treated according to his own maxim, right? The murderer cannot complain about being murdered. The liar cannot complain about being lied to. The thief cannot complain about being stolen from. To be clear, Kant does not say this is morally okay. He does not say an evil person loses his human rights. What Kant says is you are in such a case, like if you murder the murderer or lie to the liar, you are not doing injustice to that person, but you are still doing injustice in general to humanity. But that specific person would be kind of ridiculous if he complained, because by doing that action to another, whether he likes it or not, he has said it is okay to do that action. So he can now not complain if it's done to him. Kant says no, people have no right to the truth. If they did, then openness would after all be a duty. But it isn't, as I said at the start. You have a duty to truthfulness, but not a duty to openness, that is to say every truth that you know. So you might not be hurting another's rights by lying to him. Of course, there are many cases where you are, where it's also against the duties towards others, but not always. But you're hurting the rights of your own humanity. Kant would say more than anything else, you are degrading yourself by lying. It is simply a base and pathetic act to do. Indeed, Kant would go so far as to say there is no other act where we degrade ourselves and our own reason, our rationality more. Because, okay, to be sure, lying might be amongst the narrow duties, and it might be amongst the narrow duties towards ourselves. And those, as I explained in my lecture on the duties towards ourselves, those are, of the four categories, those are the most important duties to Kant. But even so, you could say, okay, but why would this be the most important of all? There are also other narrow duties towards ourselves, like not committing suicide, or not selling ourselves into slavery, or not selling our organs. But Kant would say, when it comes to other things, while we are harming the rights of our humanity, and while we are degrading our own humanity, we are at least not degrading our reason, right? So, for example, Kant says we should not sell our organs. We cannot use our own body as an instrument to make money from. The example that Kant gives is, for example, teeth, right? You cannot let someone pull out your teeth and sell them to make money. That would be immoral. And it would be degrading. It would be a sign of having no reverence for your own humanity to do that. But at least what you are sacrificing here is just a part of your body, it's just your teeth, while you are retaining your rationality. But if you lie, you are sacrificing your very rationality, because again, your speech stops being rational, it stops making sense, and you use your rationality, because I mean, lying, you can only lie if you're a rational being, right? An irrational being could not lie. You have to think, you have to plan in order to lie. It requires your intellect, but you are degrading your reason to serve an irrational purpose. You are using your reason in order to be unreasonable. And there cannot be a more grave self-degradation, Kant would say. He goes so far as to say that you degrade not only yourself, but reason itself. And not just by actually lying, but even by just saying that lying is okay. Right? So, if I ask you, is it ever morally allowed to lie? Is there such a thing as white lies or emergency lies? And you say yes, in general. Then even if you have never actually lied yet in your life, that means that essentially, so as a homo phenomenon, as the human being that appears in this sensual world, you are not a liar yet. But intellectually, as a homo noumenon, so in your character, you are a liar. You have the spirit of deceit, of untruthfulness, so to say. You are now a liar even if you have never lied. And if you are such a person, you can never be trusted. Even if you have not ever lied yet, you could potentially, according to your own admission, you could potentially lie always, right? If I ask someone, will you always be truthful? So when you speak to me, can I count on you actually believing everything you tell me? Can I trust your every word? Or will you ever lie to me? And if that person doesn't immediately and without hesitation answer with yes, but rather if that person answers, no, I will probably not always be truthful, I cannot tell you yet. In each instance, when you ask me something, I will have to think first before my answer. Whether this might be some emergency where for some other purpose, for some higher good, I must lie to you. Then how can I ever trust that person? I might not see any emergency, but I can never know for sure if maybe right now is an instance where that person believes there is an emergency that makes it okay to lie to me. And Kant says that being ready to lie like this really means you throw away your humanity. In a sense, you really stop being a human being. You are just an illusion, Kant says. You seem to be a rational being, but you are not. You are just like a speech machine. So words come out of your mouth, but they don't mean anything. And this, Kant says, means that you have less worth than even an object, even an item. Because an object, well, it has no inherent worth. It has only the value we give to it, but it has no value in itself, right? I discussed that in the lecture on human dignity. An object may have a use value. That is, it may have a price, but it has no value in itself. It has no dignity. But Kant says an object at least can be useful. And at least with an object, I can trust the object. If I know how it works, according to which rules it works, then I can trust on it always working the same way, right? Like if I know how my computer works, if I know this button turns the computer on, I know that whenever I press that button, the computer will be turned on. But the liar, I don't know if the words he's saying to me currently mean anything or not. Lying makes you completely unworthy. It is completely pathetic, Kant says. Also because lying means by necessity that you crawl, that you grovel, that you submit to that other person to whom you lie. At least you pretend to submit to him. And it is done out of weakness, out of cowardice. This is something Kant doesn't go too far into that. Fichte later on has expanded on that. Fichte would say this is also the case in the scenario with the murderer, right? I mean, people act like in order to save the victim's life, and of course, no one is questioning that you should try to save that life. Of course, you should. You should not just step aside and let the murderer get inside and murder his victim. That is clear. But people always act like lying to the murderer so that he walks away is the only way to save that life. They act like when a philosopher like Kant or Fichte says you mustn't lie, even in this case, he's saying, oh, you should let the victim get murdered. But that's not the case, Fichte says. What about the possibility, when the murderer asks you, is my victim here, of saying, this is none of your business, you shouldn't murder is wrong, and I will now stop you? What about the possibility of fighting with the murderer, disarming him if he has a knife? Maybe calling out for help, so hopefully others will come too and help you in that fight, but maybe fighting him yourself. That's also a possibility. But of course, people are too cowardly to do that. So they will pretend to others, but also they will lie to themselves that they are lying to the murderer in order to do a good thing, in order to do their duty of saving that person. But actually, they are lying in order to be able to do a good thing without taking any risks, which is not the same. So you're actually not lying for the victim, you're lying for yourself, to save yourself while saving the victim. So you want to have your cake and eat it too. You want to do a good deed, save the victim, but you don't want to take any risk. You don't want to have to fight the murderer. And that is the only reason why you lie. Because you are a weak coward. Somebody who is strong, somebody who is brave and courageous, would not need to lie. And here we can once again, I addressed this in passing in previous lectures actually already, we can once again see that Kant's morality actually aligns quite a lot with the sentiments of Nietzsche in many cases. Nietzsche is of course often misunderstood as simply being an enemy of morality, but Nietzsche of course is mostly an enemy of slave morality. He is an enemy of human patheticness. He is an enemy of weakness. But Kant's morality, even though people rarely realize that, is much closer to what Nietzsche would call a noble morality. Kant cares about human dignity, about strength, about courage, about people not groveling, not bowing down, but holding their head high. And if you hold your head high, you will despise the lie, you will despise the liar, and you will despise yourself for having lied, for having weaseled your way through, instead of being straightforward and achieving your goals, especially your moral goals, like saving someone's life, in a straightforward and direct manner. This is also why Kant says, he always comes back to these two types of bad people, the malicious person, the somewhat cruel person, and on the other hand, the deceitful person, the liar. And why he says that the former has more chance of becoming better. Because while he might be too cruel, too brutal to others, as long as he is straightforward, as long as he is brave, he might maybe lack reverence for others, but at least he has not thrown his own dignity away completely. And he, Kant says, can be disciplined. He can learn to be more tactful, to be more careful with others. But the liar, who has already thrown away his own dignity, who has no problem at least pretending to submit to others, is completely unworthy. And it is hard to actually moralize such a person. But here we get back to the general problem when it comes to Kant's moral philosophy and people understanding Kant's moral philosophy. People often simply don't get it because they are so fixated on this consequentialism. In their mind, every action is an in order to. I do this action in order to achieve something. And the only injustice they know is material injustice. That is an injustice that materially harms someone. So actually people don't think that lying as such is bad. They don't think that anything as such is bad. They only think that things are bad if they have bad consequences. So they think that murder is bad because it hurts someone, or rape is bad because it hurts and maybe traumatizes someone. And likewise, they may think that in some cases lying is bad because it causes harm. Like if you trick somebody into giving you his money, then they will say, okay, that is an immoral action, but because you swindled him for his money. You might as well have robbed that person by force. Would be the same. You would still get the money. But it's not the lie as such. It's the harmful consequence which people think is bad. But people don't know that there is such a thing as a formal injustice, not a material one where somebody is harmed, but a formal injustice. They can't imagine that an action could be evil, could be immoral, could be against the human dignity when there is nobody harmed. I mean, this is not just a problem when it comes to lying, right? This is also when it comes to, for example, the morality of sexuality. Of course, here, without getting into what Kant says too much, here a lot of what Kant says unfortunately has to be dismissed because he didn't think it through. He is a person of his time. Like, he will say that it is immoral, that it is against your own human dignity to have gay sex. And he believes that it is unnatural, which of course nowadays we know that it happens amongst animals too. It's clearly not unnatural. So the specifics of Kant's sexual morality might be wrong. But the fact that he has one at all, that he does believe there is such a thing as through certain sex acts. Again, we can discuss which sex acts these should be, and here Kant is wrong in some of his judgments, but that you can, through certain sex acts, throw away your dignity. That is something completely unheard of today, right? Nowadays we have, of course, this liberal morality that says it's all about consent, which of course is important, but it's not the only thing. People cannot imagine that it is possible for two consenting grown-ups to engage in something which does not harm anyone because they both consented, but they still shouldn't do because it is disgraceful for their humanity. And likewise, people, when it comes to the lie, they cannot imagine that the lie might not harm anyone. It might even help someone, even save a life, but it still disgraces humanity. People are just so used to think in utilitarian terms, to just ask about the utility, the usefulness of an action. Every action is sought from the purpose which this action serves. But the great accomplishment of Kant in moral philosophy is to have clearly shown that morality has no purpose. Morality is its own purpose. You should act good not in order to, but you should act good because it is good to act good. You should act good because it is the right thing to do. You should act good because it is your moral duty. So there can be a because when it comes to a good action, but there should never be an in order to. If you do an action in order to achieve something, then that action is not done for its own sake, then that action is just an instrument to achieve something else. And then it's not a moral action, right? Like if you are a believer, for example, and you do good deeds in order to go into heaven, then you're selfish. You're not doing the good deeds because they're good, but because you think that your God will reward you for them. You would probably also do evil deeds if you believe that God would reward you for them. And I mean, many people do, right? Like killing the infidels, believing that this is a good thing to do. The point is, why many people have such a hard time understanding how bad lying is, it's because they don't care about morality at all. They are simply not moral people, and morality is simply not something that factors into their life. There are these two principles of action, Kant says, as I explained in the lecture on the imperatives. They are eudaimonists. What they care about is personal happiness. And that is not the same as morality. And they, at best, believe that morality is meant to be a tool to achieve happiness. So, of course, they will say, and this is quite consistent even from their point of view, from their ideology, you have to hand that to them. It is consistent when they say, okay, in an instance where morality does not serve as a tool to achieve happiness, where maybe the moral action actually achieves unhappiness, like not lying to the murderer, then I will not do the moral action. That is perfectly consistent if you are a eudaimonist. But you should not pretend that your actions are about morality. They are about happiness. And morality is not the tool to achieve happiness. That's Kant's great accomplishment, that he has clearly separated the two in philosophy. But this is precisely what people struggle with so much. They cannot imagine an action without a purpose. They cannot imagine not asking, what do I do this for? What do I try to achieve? They cannot imagine doing an action for its own sake. They cannot imagine saying, I do this action not because it will create some happiness, but because doing it is my duty, and I would be unworthy. I would be degrading my own rationality, my own humanity, if I did something else. That's not a thought that crosses many people's minds. And we can see this, of course, in how society treats the liar that got discovered, the liar whose lie came out. Society, I'm talking about our current society nowadays, society is shamefully, disgracefully lenient and forgiving with liars. It's treated as a small thing that you can overlook, right? Because again, we believe that there's no harm done. Society is not so lenient all the time when it believes that an action does harm, right? So, for example, society is not lenient with people who have raped children because people will say, oh, this probably causes lifelong harm, this traumatizes the child forever. But if somebody lied, I mean, of course, society is also very forgiving in many instances where actions actually cause harm, right? I mean, society doesn't care if you go shopping, if you go shopping for new fashionable clothes, even though you actively take part in slavery, in exploitation, and here also children, of course, get harmed, right? You are supporting child labor probably if you buy some new clothes from famous brands or whatever. Or society does not care if you fly or if you eat meat and thereby contribute to the climate crisis. So clearly, society is very hypocritical. But still, at least society sometimes will judge you for causing harm to others. But when it comes to lies, it seems that society just thinks a lie as such does not cause a lot of harm, maybe a little bit sometimes, but not a lot like rape or murder, so it's a smaller thing that you can overlook. I mean, you can very clearly see from the fact that most people don't seem to mind at all being ruled by liars. Lying and being caught in a lie does not really harm any politician's career. And it doesn't really matter the party, right? They all lie. They can all lie. Very telling is a series of scandals that we had here in Germany for about the last 14 years involving doctors. So I think this is a very German thing. This would probably not work like that in other countries. But here, quite a number of politicians have a PhD, and they will remind you that they have a PhD. Like they will put it on their campaign poster. It will read Doctor so and so, name of the politician. Vote for Doctor so and so. Because yeah, well, what can I say? Germans are superstitious like that. They believe in authority. They think if someone has a PhD, it somehow makes them a better politician or whatever. And because of that, many politicians, it turns out, fake their PhD, or like they had their dissertation ghost written by somebody else or something, or they wrote one involving many misquotes, not really naming their citations, copy pasting some text that wasn't theirs, and not making it clear that this is actually a quote or not their own text. And quite a number. This started in like 2011. That's when like the first one was corked, and then quite a number of politicians actually, because people checked their works, right? They copy pasted the text of their doctor thesis and searched online if they could find the text, and then found that the text was actually not written by that politician but copied from somewhere else. So quite a number of politicians were involved in scandals and lost their PhD, and then most of them, or basically all except the most shameless one of them, actually stepped down from their position, and it somewhat ended their political career. By the way, this involved mostly, big surprise there, politicians from the big conservative party and from the small liberal party. And to the Americans, we actually know what words mean, at least somewhat. So when I say liberal party, they are not a leftist party, they are a liberal party. So I'm talking about the party of the unpatriotic rich guys that don't want to pay taxes. That's our liberals. And also a number of politicians from the big Social Democratic Party. Anyways, whenever such a scandal happened, and you read some article about it online and you scrolled down to the comments, you would always read the same comments. There would be dozens and hundreds of people actually defending that politician. And I mean, how can you defend that? This should be beyond party politics, right? No matter what party you are on, why would you want to be ruled by a fraud? Why would you want to be ruled by a liar? Like, this should be the bare minimum that we can agree on. Doesn't matter if you're left or right or center, you should want an honest politician with integrity to represent you, right? I mean, how undignified, how pathetic can you be to actually defend a liar? There is simply nothing to defend here. And still, you would always read these comments of people saying, oh, I didn't vote for a scientist, or I don't want a scholar as a minister, I want somebody who does good politics. Which, I mean, that statement taken in isolation is correct. Don't get me wrong. I don't need my politicians to have PhDs. I don't need them to even have finished high school. I wouldn't care if they hadn't gone to school as long as they do good politics. But nobody has complained about those politicians who don't have a PhD. We are complaining about those politicians who have a PhD that they shouldn't have because they lied. And that's the problem, that they are liars. And I really don't see how you cannot have a problem with that. But many people don't. Many people are perfectly fine as long as a politician is on their team, as long as a politician stands for policies that they support, because they don't care apparently about the character, about the dignity and integrity of a politician. They only care about his politics, which I can guarantee will not be good and people serving politics if he has no integrity. And I want to make clear, because unfortunately, the left and the center have somehow made it so that people now believe that lying is mostly a thing of the right. Like, right, like when you think of a lying politician, you are probably gonna think of Trump first. Which, honestly, I don't get. I don't get why Trump is seen as the big liar. If you ask me, my impression is that Trump is more honest than most politicians. I mean, America first, let's be real, that could have been every president's slogan. I mean, that was always American politics. You cannot tell me that Biden or Obama or Bush or whatever, that their politics was not America first. You cannot tell me that America ever cared about other countries, cared about the global community above its own interests, or even equally as much as its own interests. Trump is just being more honest. When he wants to rename the Ministry of Defense to Ministry of War, people think that is somehow scandalous. I think it is very honest. I mean, what else has that ministry been for America? America certainly didn't defend itself in Iraq or in Afghanistan. It fought a war, an illegal war of aggression. So, if anything, Trump is more honest. Of course, he lies constantly, but I really, and I mean that, I really don't get why he specifically is treated as this big shameless liar, and his opponents are still treated as somewhat respectable politicians and statesmen. I mean, take someone like Biden, who still has a bit of a reputation, at least in some circles. I mean, maybe people might consider him old and senile, but many will probably not consider him such a big and shameless liar as Trump. May I remind you that Biden stood in front of the world and said that Israel had shown him videos of beheaded babies? I mean, what was that if not the most brazen lie? We know, of course, now that all this propaganda about 40 beheaded babies and babies put in an oven and Of course, also systematic rapes of women where their breasts were cut off or whatever, or a baby being cut out of a pregnant woman's belly, all these disgusting cruelties that were made up. We, of course, now know that this was propaganda. But I mean, Biden said that he was shown videos or images of beheaded babies. This cannot be true because there were none, right? We know that on the 7th of October, 2 babies were shot in the fire, not directly purposefully killed, shot in the fire, of course, still a war crime. But we know that there were no 40 beheaded babies. So he lied, and not just any lie, he lied in support of a genocide, and still people treat him as the more respectable guy, as opposed to Trump. No, lying is not a problem of specifically the right, and believe me, I'm the last person to defend the right, but lying is a problem of all the politicians. I cannot think of a single politician, at least like a higher ranking politician. Maybe there's some local mayor in some small town that I don't know of, but I'm talking about like ministers, presidents, such politicians. I cannot think of a single one, no matter which party, no matter which political side, who is not a liar. And if you don't despise the liar with all of your heart, then you yourself are somebody who must be despised. Kant says at several points, it is a terrible time when people actually honor the honest person, when people actually applaud somebody for his honesty. Because a time that does such a thing must be a time where honesty is a rare thing, right? If everybody was honest, then we would not applaud that honesty. And I mean, normally it shouldn't be. It should be taken for granted. Just like we don't applaud anybody and treat anybody as a hero because he has not murdered someone. It should be a given that you are not a murderer or that you are not a rapist. And likewise, it should be a given that you are not a liar. So, in a day and age where it is something special and something worthy of praise that somebody is honest, that must be a very bad time and age. But Kant says there's one time, one age that is even worse. And that is if you live in an age where the single honest person is not even praised anymore. Because that means that not only are the people liars, that means that they don't even care anymore about honesty and truth. And I mean, that is the state of the world, right? I can't think of anyone who is really praised for telling the truth. I mean, it's not like there is no one who's telling the truth. There is, of course. Think of Greta Thunberg. I mean, say about her what you want. Dislike her as much as you want because you're a climate change denier or because you are a genocide denier and racist. But the one thing you cannot do is pretend that she ever lied. In now 7 years of her public appearance, I cannot think of a single instance where she was caught in a lie, where she was caught in dishonesty. You cannot possibly doubt her truthfulness and integrity. I mean, people have often claimed, oh, she's a small, manipulated child. Okay, maybe she is. Maybe there is no climate change and she's totally wrong about that. But at least she is truthful. At least she's doing it because she believes in it, not for some self-serving purposes. So we have here a person who is always truthful, but I don't see her praised for that. I don't see her respected for it, even by her enemies. And again, in an ideal world, she shouldn't be, because everyone should be like her. But in our world, where it's so rare, where all politicians of all camps are constantly and shamelessly lying to the people, it says a lot about how little people care about truthfulness. And that, in turn, says a lot about how little self-respect people have. If you don't like the person who tells you the truth, the person who is honest with you, and if you don't dislike the person who shamelessly lies to you, you have no self-regard. But even with all of that, the question is not fully answered. Why is Kant not just against the lie, but rather why is he against the lie so categorically and radically? It's not just that the lie is one bad thing amongst others, like murder, like stealing, like rape, that Kant rejects, but rather he pretty clearly says that there is nothing which you are less able to pair with goodness than the lie. And he very clearly states that truthfulness should be the highest law of human nature. Why is that? It is because all other morality basically depends on truthfulness. Kant would say, if you don't have the virtue of truthfulness, you can hardly have the other virtues. If you have the vice of lying, of deceitfulness, then you can have all the other vices. I mean, think about it. If people were only forced to always be honest and truthful, if people were incapable of lying, then they would be pretty much incapable of doing any other evil thing. The evil in the world is only possible because the lie is possible. And this goes for both lies. The outer lie, that is lying to other people, and the inner lie, that is lying to yourself. I mean, because for one, our evil actions depend on us lying to others. They depend on us hiding those evil actions. Imagine you had to be truthful about the evil you are doing. I mean, even with smaller things, we don't have to think of big things like murder. But of course, if you had to confess a murder, you could not be a murderer, or you could be maybe one time, but then you would be in jail. But even smaller things, all these small, everyday evil acts that people do. Imagine somebody is cheating on his wife, or somebody is a drunkard, or somebody is stealing towels in a hotel, which is just pathetic. But imagine he was honest about that. Imagine he wouldn't pretend to be a respectable member of society, but imagine he would come into his work on Monday and be like, oh yeah, this weekend I got completely drunk and then I harassed women in the club. Would probably not make such a good impression. So our evil acts depend largely on us hiding them from others and being dishonest. But even more so, they depend on us lying to ourselves, on us telling ourselves that what we are doing here is not actually evil. Because usually no one wants to be the bad guy. And usually the bad guys don't think of themselves as the bad guys. No matter how bad somebody is. I mean, even the Nazis were able to tell themselves that they are the good guys. No one could probably walk around and really admit to himself, I'm evil. I'm a rapist. I'm a murderer. I took part in genocide. No, they always need some excuses, right? Like, think of this case that went around the world, this rape case of Giselle Pellicot in the last year, um, who was for years repeatedly drugged by her husband, and then he found random men online to rape her when she was drugged. Um, in court, all these men said, I'm innocent. I didn't rape her. It's her husband's fault. I thought it was consensual. I thought she was into that. I thought that was their kink. No regular rapist tells himself he's a rapist. He tells himself, oh, she wanted it. She asked for it. It was her kink. I'm innocent. And likewise, right? The people, even people who commit genocide, they will not go around and say, oh, I committed genocide. They will say, oh, we just defended ourselves. The other people started it. We had to do it. Maybe it was not pretty, it was not nice. I will admit that, maybe, but we had to do it in order to save ourselves. It's what the Nazis told themselves. It's what the Israelis tell themselves. Deceiving yourself is how you shut up your conscience. Without being able to lie to themselves, the evil people could probably not deal with their own evil. They could probably not sleep at night. I mean, just the other day, I called the foreign ministry because, I'm here in Germany. As you probably know, Germany is a shameless genocide supporter. And since currently the Sumut flotilla is on its way to Gaza, and amongst the heroes on board that flotilla, there is also German citizens. I mean, not that that should even matter, right? Even if there weren't, we should still support it. But still, I called the foreign ministry to ask what they are doing against Israeli piracy, to ask when they will come out, as over a dozen other nations have already done, in support, diplomatic support for the freedom, for the Sumut flotilla, and to ask when Germany will send warships to Gaza. Because after all, Spain and even fucking Italy, which has a fucking right-wing government, has done it. I mean, if Germany could have been disgraced anymore after 2 years of genocide support and denial, it is by a right-wing government doing more for human rights than the nation who allegedly has learned from its genocidal past. So I called the foreign ministry. The first woman I talked to said, I don't give a shit, and just hung up on me. And I'm not, she really said, I don't give a shit. I mean, of course, she spoke German, but she said the equivalent of that. She was equally vulgar. This is how professional and also how moral these people are. So I called another time, talked to some other woman. And that woman, of course, was also a genocide denier. I mean, at this point, I don't think you can really work as a German civil servant if you're not a genocide denier, right? You would probably have lost your job by now. I mean, there has been such a case, a prominent one, Melanie Schweitzer, who worked in the Ministry of Work, who lost her job because in the nation that learned from its genocidal past, we don't want our civil servants to stand up against genocide. So this woman I talked to, she was such a liar that she couldn't even bring herself to outright deny the genocide, in fact. Maybe she would have done that 2 years ago, or maybe even a year ago. Maybe she would have just called me an anti-Semite back then. But even here in Germany, things have slightly shifted. I mean, very, very slightly. Of course, Germany still refuses to even do the empty symbolic act of recognizing Palestine when even France can do that. But still, things have slightly shifted. So she didn't outright say there's no genocide. She just refused to answer it. Like, I asked her what is the stance, and of course, first she wanted to hide behind the ministry. She wanted to say, "Oh, I can't give an official statement. You have to say what." You have to look at what the ministry gives to the press or what the foreign minister says in front of the press. But I don't allow for that. I mean, that's one of the things that distinguish me as an actual philosopher and Aufklärer from people who are maybe called philosophers and who just talk about philosophy in general terms. It's easy to talk about philosophy or about human rights or truthfulness or morality in general terms, but I don't let people hide. I don't let people get away. That's why people dislike me, because I get personal. I mean, these people, like civil servants, people who work for the state and so on, of course, also in the private sector, people who work for companies, they like to hide behind their employer. They like to basically say, I'm just following orders, right? I'm just a small cog in the machine. Well, no, you cannot say that, especially not in Germany. This is, of course, what Arendt called the banality of evil. But I asked this woman directly, what do you personally say? Do you recognize this as a genocide? And to that, and this is why I'm telling this story, to that she said, this is none of your business. This is my own personal opinion. What I did as a reply is, I asked her if she believes in climate change. To which she said, of course, I would be an idiot to not believe in that. I just have to look out of the window. I can see the changes in the weather. If she was consistent, or just a little smart, to be honest, if she was consistent, she should have also said, this is my private opinion. It's none of your business whether I believe in climate change or not. But she didn't. She had no problem admitting that there's a climate change. Of course, both cases are exactly the same, right? I mean, she said I would have to be an idiot to not recognize the climate changing. I just have to look out of the window. Well, you would have to be an idiot to not recognize genocide. You just have to look online. I mean, you can literally see on YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram, Israeli soldiers posting their own war crimes, posting themselves looting TVs, clothes, jewelry, even pets, bringing them home to their girlfriends or whatever, posting themselves posing and dancing in the underwear of Palestinian women. I mean, you can literally see that. And also, what also both cases have in common is that there is a consensus amongst the scholars, right? You can only deny it by being a conspiracy theorist and by being in complete opposition to scholarship and science. I mean, all climate scholars agree that there's a climate crisis, and all the genocide scholars, like the International Association of Genocide and like even Jewish Israeli genocide scholars like Omar Batov or Ras Segal, agree, of course, that this is a genocide. And still, the woman refused to give a straight answer. And I think that she really believed her own words. Like, she didn't just say them to get rid of me. This is none of your business. This is my own personal opinion, whether I believe in genocide or not. I believe, because also of the way she talked, she was really angry. She even ended up asking me how old I am, which I refused to answer because it's like it's not relevant to the genocide. But again, these people are very unprofessional. It's really unbelievable what kind of people are allowed to work for the German ministries and to talk to the public, to talk to citizens who might have some concerns. She really believed, oh, who is this guy? How can he call here when I'm just a worker when I'm just doing my job and get personal and ask me personally about my personal opinion on genocide, that's none of his business. And only, but of course, in other cases, she has no problem talking about her personal opinions. She only has a problem when she, at least unconsciously, know that her personal opinions are wrong and evil. So this is how she shuts up her own conscience. And this is how you have to shut up your own conscience. I mean, if she admitted to herself, yes, there's a genocide, how could she just keep calmly walking for the German foreign ministry? So that's the point. And by the way, I invite you to do the same thing in whatever country you are in. Probably your country also, maybe not quite as much as Germany, which is extra bad and extra disgraceful, but probably your country also supports genocide to some degree at least, and could do much more. Could, for example, send ships to support the Sumut flotilla. So I invite you to annoy your civil servants, to remind them that they are not just following orders, or at least they shouldn't, but they are actually human beings with actual responsibility who should actually feel ashamed of themselves if they are not doing anything. Just like everyone should feel ashamed of themselves. But my point is, if you couldn't lie to yourself, you probably couldn't commit evil or take part in evil. Kant says that morality is about having character. I discussed that in its own lecture, how character and firm principles are important, because that is what character means to Kant. Character is not the same thing that we call personality nowadays, because that involves also stuff like your temperament, which comes from your nature, which is something that you didn't choose, Kant would say. The character is something you chose. The character means having principles and then sticking to them, being consistent. So a character is like a second, a self-chosen nature, and he who has character is someone who can be counted on, is someone who is reliable, Kant would say. So if a person of character tells you, I will help you next week, I will be there when you need me, or if someone of character tells you, I will call you back, or whatever, then you know that he will actually do it because he has character. And morality requires character. Compassion, helping someone when you feel like it, when you happen to see that he's in need, and when you happen to feel pity, is not enough. I also discussed that in its own lecture. What you need is character. Principles that you set for yourself. Kant says, nothing is more in contradiction with a character than lying. Again, the outer lie, lying to others, that means that you are characterless, that maybe you pretend to have a certain character, maybe you pretend even to be a person of honesty and integrity, but in fact you don't have this character. But worse, again, is the inner lie. Because Kant would say that you can try to have a character, you can set principles for yourself, and maybe it will be hard. Like, even in small things. You don't have to go into the big moral questions, even small things like, let's say you want to quit smoking. Maybe it will be hard. Maybe you will fall back a few times. But as long as you are honest with yourself, as long as if you try to quit smoking and then you smoked again, you honestly admit to yourself, no, I wanted to stop. I shouldn't smoke now. You can get to it. But if you are willing and able to lie to yourself, you will find excuses. You will be like, oh, okay, I decided to stop smoking, I know, but now I didn't smoke for a whole week. That is already a record, and this day today has been so stressful. I can allow myself one last cigarette. It will be the last, and then I will go back to not smoking. Or maybe you will say, oh, I know I stopped smoking, but now somebody is offering me a cigarette. I'm not really smoking, I'm just taking it out of politeness. I would not have done it myself. And you do that a few times, and then after some days or 1 or 2 weeks, you have completely dropped your intention of not smoking and just basically given up and went back to smoking. So you can't form a character if you allow yourself to lie to yourself about what you're doing, if you allow yourself to find excuses. This leads me to one last main point, and that is that to Kant, the radical evil is precisely the lie. I already talked about his concept of the radical evil in its own lecture, which you might check out. I will point out, as I did in that lecture, that radical is not the same as extreme, even though nowadays they are often used as synonyms. Extreme means out there. Radical comes from radix, which means root, so it means deep down, at the root, at the basis. So when Kant talks of the radical evil, it's not about how extreme the outcome is. If it leads to an extreme evil action, like to murder, or to a smaller action, like stealing an apple or whatever. What he's talking about is what is the root in human nature of that evil. And many people don't quite fully grasp just how important the lie is here to Kant, because admittedly in his actual text on the radical evil, he talks about it in his main work on religion, the religion within the bounds of mere reason, is where he introduces the term radical evil. Here he's actually not quite clear about how important the lie is. But if you read his notes, his lectures, and so on, it becomes more clear that it is precisely the lie which is the most important part, which really is at the root of evil. Kant says it is quite fitting that in the Bible, the evil in the world does not start with the murder of one brother by his brother, right? Of Cain murdering Abel. That is in the second generation. But rather, evil starts with the lie, the snake's lie, lying to Eve. And the devil, of course, in the tradition has often been referred to as the liar from the beginning, or as the Lord of Lies. It is the lie, Kant says, which is the rotten spot on humankind. Once again, without the lie, other evils would hardly be possible. Only with the lie do we shut up our conscience. And the lie that you tell yourself, of course, knows no boundaries, none at all. I'm again and again amazed by the human capability of lying to yourself, because I'm not really able to do that to such a degree. Like, I'm not saying that I'm not able to do wrong. I've done bad things in my life, but the thing is, I admit them to myself and then I try to be better. Maybe I don't manage, maybe I fail, maybe I do bad things again, but then again I admit it to myself. But I'm not really able of like ever standing on the wrong side, ever being like on the wrong side of history. I'm not really able to deceive myself to such a fundamental degree. I'm just too aufklärt and too truth-loving for that. Like, the philosopher cannot do that. He cannot allow that to himself. And if I wouldn't see to what degree other people manage to lie to themselves, I couldn't believe it, that it's possible. But it must be possible. Again, even the Nazis thought they were the good guys. They were in the right. And nowadays, again, it's a great disgrace for my country. But again, I live in a country, and you really can't believe the discourse here. Even now, after 2 years of live stream genocide, it has hardly moved. Even now, when almost all the rest of the world is starting to recognize Palestine, just we still don't do that. And just the other day, I read some politician of the reigning conservative party saying, no, that would not lead to freedom, which I mean is actually true, but recognizing Palestine now could just serve to create further irritation and distrust, I think is what he said, on both sides of the conflict. I mean, you cannot make this up. In the middle of a genocide, saying, first of all, that there is a conflict which has two sides, and saying that recognizing the victim could cause irritation and distrust on the side of the perpetrator. You cannot make it up. If you're from outside Germany, you will probably have no idea how bad it is here. And again, this goes to show the lie has no boundaries, because people really believe that, and even the politicians, it's not just propaganda. Many of them believe what they are saying. So I live in a country that managed to tell itself that the correct way of repenting for a genocide is by supporting another genocide. The correct way of repenting for Nazism, for racism, is by supporting a settler colonial racist apartheid state. You cannot make that up. If 10 or 20 years ago you would have written a book with that story, people would have said, no, that's too much. I mean, that's unrealistic. If Israel would go that far, then even the Germans would start saying this crosses a red line. Well, no, apparently they don't. So this should prove that any lie is possible. Human beings are able to tell themselves anything, even the most outrageous, even the most obviously untrue things, and to believe it. And that is what makes us able to be evil. And this ability is, Kant says, the rotten spot on humankind. Because other evils, if you do evil for some other reason, you can be moralized, you can become better, Kant says, even if it's an extreme evil. And again, extreme is not the same as radical. So let's say a pedophile who watches child porn. Of course, that's an extreme evil. Of course, great harm is done to the children. But as long as he is just succumbing to his sexual urges, but at least he's honest with himself, as long as he feels bad about it, as long as he feels terrible afterward, as long as he keeps telling himself, what am I doing here? I must stop this. These children are getting harmed. Then there is hope for him trying to overcome his urges. Maybe he can go and seek therapy. Maybe he can go and start taking drugs that actually lower your sexual drives. But as soon as you tell yourself that what you are doing is right, that you are allowed to do it, then there is no hope of you ever becoming better. Because why would you? Why would you try to change when you think that the way you are is perfectly fine? The only way you could become better now is by first stopping to lie to yourself, is by first admitting that no, what you do is not right. right? This is why this is such a radical evil. Kant says when it comes to doing good, we have enough natural compassion or empathy, like that is something that nature or God gave us enough of, more or less. He is not so cynical as to say that human beings don't care about one another at all. Like a normal uh, person who's not completely sick in the head, when you see somebody suffering right in front of you, you will probably feel pity and try to help. The problem is that we can lie to ourselves. This is not something that nature gave us. Nature did not give us natural honesty. And so we can always tell ourselves that we have already done enough, or that what we are doing is not so bad, right? You might feel pity on the person suffering right in front of you, but then you tell yourself, oh, it's okay to fly, to go on vacation. I need my vacation. I deserve my vacation. I've earned it. I've worked so hard. And, anyways, what is it really gonna change? It's just a drop in the ocean if I don't fly. Everyone else flies. So, the climate is not gonna be saved if I don't fly. So, here, you don't see the persons that are suffering somewhere else on the earth. And, I mean, within the next 15 years already, there could be big, serious droughts from Texas and California to South Africa to the whole Mediterranean region. Um, but since you don't directly see the suffering person in front of you, you don't feel direct pity. And here now you can lie to yourself. So this is where nature, so to say, or where God, so to say, did not give us enough natural goodness. This is where we have to make ourselves good, where we have to make the conscious decision to have a character and to be honest with ourselves. And this evil is also so radical precisely because it does not come from our nature as such. For Kant, the human being is a threefold being. I will discuss this further when I get to his anthropology eventually. But he says that we are animals, that is, we have an animal nature. We are thinking animals, we are animals with an intellect, that is, we have a mixed nature. And we are rational beings, that is, we have a spiritual nature. And other evils might be connected to our animal nature, to our drives, right? Like our sexual urges or our greed or whatever, that might drive us to commit evil. And sometimes we might give in to those drives. But as long as we admit to ourselves that we shouldn't follow them, we can maybe learn to rule our drives. We can learn to take control of our animal nature. But the lie is the one thing that we do as a spiritual being. So that's why it's such a core sin, such a radical sin. That is also why, once again, the Christian mythology is quite right to treat the devil as a liar, right? Because the devil is thought of as a spiritual being. He has no animal nature, he has no animalistic drives. So he's not evil because of his selfish urges that he gives into, but rather he chose to be evil. And that is also what we can do, but of course shouldn't do. Uh, Lying to yourself is a choice. The drives you have, you don't choose. Of course, you can still try to choose to control them, right? But lying to yourself, that is a choice. And that is, once again, while Kant says someone who does evil, even extreme evil, out of strong drives, be it the rapist out of lust, be it the murderer out of hatred, he can become a better person because he can still realize this is wrong and try to do something about this problem. But the person who is evil and has some evil principles that justify it, cannot become better as long as he doesn't let go of those principles. Kant even gives some examples. Like he says, if you tell yourself somebody that gets tricked, it's his own fault, right? If you just if you commit fraud, if you trick somebody for his money because you're greedy, and I tell you this was wrong, then maybe you can feel bad and you can realize that it was wrong and that you should try to be less greedy and you can try give him back the money. But if I tell you it was wrong, and then you tell me, oh, maybe it was wrong, but it's his own fault because he was so stupid and fell for my trick. And honestly, the world is not a nice place. There are lots of people who will try to trick you. People have tried to trick me too during my life. If anything, this guy should be thankful. I've taught him an important lesson, and now maybe he's gonna be more careful with the next guy and not gonna be so naive anymore. If you have learned to think like that, I cannot even give you a bad conscience. You will not change your ways. Likewise, Kant says a bad principle would be God hates the infidels. Doesn't matter what your specific phase is. If you hurt somebody, maybe he angered you and in your anger you hit him or whatever, I can tell you this is wrong, and maybe you will realize it was wrong and you will feel bad and you will say, okay, I will try to do something about my anger. But if that person has another face than you, and if you believe that God hates the infidels and they will all go to hell, then you can just tell me, no, I don't feel bad about what I did to an infidel because he's not a believer. I can do whatever I want. God actually likes when I hurt the infidels. Or Kant says another harmful principle is when you believe instead of you should help your neighbor, everyone is his own neighbor. Everyone is closest to himself. And if everyone only cares for himself, then everyone is cared for. That would also be such a bad and evil principle. Or just the cynic's belief that everyone is bad. Because normally, if I point out to you that you have done something bad, then you can try to become better. But if you believe that anyone is bad anyways, that the seemingly good person is probably just a hypocrite who's just pretending, then you can just say, oh, leave me alone. Maybe what I did was bad, but that's human nature. No one can be good. No one is ever good. We are all bad. So that gives you an excuse to not even try. So that is why having wrong principles is the most dangerous thing in morality. Not having strong desires, strong drives, those you can learn to rule and control, even if they do tend to drive you to evil actions. But having the wrong principles, as long as you don't change them, you will not even try to be better. And that is why to Kant it is so important to not allow lies, not even so-called emergency lies, to save someone's life. But it is important here again, Kant is not unjust and he's not pedantic. So he would say, if you do lie to the murderer to save somebody's life, it can be excused. It just should never be justified, because that's not the same. I addressed this in the lecture as Kant's morality too strict, and also in the lecture on the ideal of holiness, that Kant makes a very clear distinction, that he says the moral law as such, the demand of morality, needs to be rigorous and needs to be, well, demanding. It needs to be a holy law. So we have to acknowledge that the demand is, don't ever lie, be truthful. Even in the face of the murderer. Maybe stand in his way, maybe fight him to save somebody's life. but don't lie. Now, we will probably never meet the demand of the moral law. Nobody is perfect. And so Kant says, if in that situation, maybe because you are too weak, because you are too cowardly, you are afraid of the murderer, you resort to lying, it can be excused. It's not a reason to completely throw you away as a person, to completely despise you. It's not a reason to say, oh, you now deserve to go to hell, you are evil. But what we shouldn't do is justify it. Because if you lie out of weakness and cowardice, this is again a case of your animal nature taking over, of your drives making you do an immoral action. But as long as you acknowledge that it is not the right action, you can try to change. You can try to become stronger and more courageous. But as soon as you justify it, that is, as you tweak and change the moral law itself and lie to yourself that actually this is not your moral obligation to always be truthful, then you made up an excuse that prevents you from ever becoming better. And this mustn't happen. And to close off, Kant does say that sincerity is, however, the one thing in morality where we can be perfect. I will point out, by the way, Kant says sincerity, not honesty. It's important to him to distinguish that, because he says they are objectively the same. They are both about being truthful, saying what you think is true, but subjectively they are different. And to him, honesty is not a moral quality, because he says someone can be honest without being a moral person. Maybe you are honest out of stupidity. Maybe you are just a simple-minded person who is too simple and naive to even think of a lie, or to even think of that the fact that you just say, that you just blurt out the truth might have negative consequences for you that you could prevent with a lie. So honesty as such is not moral. Kant says only sincerity is, because to him sincerity is honesty founded on firm moral principles. And this, again, he says, is always possible. Maybe not the truthfulness with others, because again, there might be situations where you are too afraid to speak the truth. But it makes no sense to be afraid of yourself. So you can always be truthful with yourself. Since, once again, the lie is not a sin of our animal nature, but a sin of our spiritual nature, there is no drive that can drive us to lie to ourselves. And that might be stronger than our resolve. The only reason why we lie to ourselves is because we decide to do it, because we want to do it. And that is also the reason why we can stop it at any moment. So Kant would always say that in morality we should strive for perfection. We should strive for the ideal of holiness. It should be our goal to become a holy person, like Jesus might have been. But he would also say that we can never reach that goal fully. We can maybe always get a bit closer, always become better, but we can never reach it. You will probably always stay imperfect in all other matters. Like, no matter how much you try, let's say, to be respectful with your fellow human beings, maybe you will still have a bad day where you are a bit more harsh. Maybe you used to scream at people when you had a bad day, and over the course of your life you manage to get better at that, so you don't lose your shit anymore, you don't scream, but maybe you're still a bit more unfriendly than you would be on a better day. So you will never reach perfection. But when it comes to lying to yourself, Kant says this is the one thing where you can reach perfection. You can completely stop to lie to yourself, because nothing is making you lie to yourself. Only you do. And if you stop with that, then that is the start of becoming a moral person. Now I will only add that there are two more very important reasons in Kant's philosophy to reject the lie, which I keep for upcoming lectures. For one, our conscience, which I will discuss in the next lecture. You can, of course, only be moral by again and again checking yourself, being self critical, reflecting on whether you did act morally or not. And of course, this doesn't work if you lie to yourself. So, as I already said in this lecture, if you lie, you shut up your conscience. So, the conscience requires absolute truthfulness. What exactly the conscience is, according to Kant, what exactly conscientiousness is, I will keep for the next lecture, but I will already stress that clearly it requires truthfulness to work. And then the other thing is Kant's philosophy of right, which I will discuss after the conscience in several lectures. Kant says that when it comes to right or to law, whether it is state law within one state between the individuals, whether it's international law between several states, whether it is what he calls cosmopolitan law, the law between human beings as such, as inhabiting the same planet, he is a contractionalist. So to him, all rights depend on a contract, right? In the natural state, if there were no laws, if there was no state, we could just do anything. Might would make right. Nobody can want to live in this natural state. So we should make a contract with one another. Like, I tell the other person, I promise to not kill you and I give up my weapons. If you promise to not kill me and give up your weapons. But in order for this to be possible, of course, I must be able to trust the other person. Otherwise, I've not just disarmed myself and completely given myself into that other person's mercy, right? So Kant would say, in general, the right, the law, is there precisely because people are not good, right? If we were all angels, then we would need no state, we would need no laws to enforce good actions, right? If everyone was good, we wouldn't need to forbid murder because no one would do it anyways. We need the laws precisely because people are not moral. So the laws should not count on people's morality. Can't even go so far as to say a good state with good laws would function even if it was a state full of devils. If the state requires all its citizens to be angels, then it's not a good state. It has no good laws. But this truthfulness, not lying, is the one instance where you could say people do need to be angels and not devils. Because in order for there even to be a state, in order for there to even be law, you first need a contract and you first need to be able to trust each other. And that is a main reason also why Kant rejects the lie so much, because it destroys society. It destroys humans' ability to live together under the same law. And that is something that is often missed when it comes to this infamous essay where he discusses, can you lie to the would-be murderer? And that the critics of that essay usually miss. It is not an essay on ethics. It is an essay on the philosophy of right and justice. Admittedly, this is easy to miss if you are not familiar with Kant's practical philosophy as a whole, and with this distinction that Kant makes. Like, I will openly admit that I myself, when I read that essay for the first time, also didn't got it. But if you know Kant's practical philosophy as a whole, it becomes very obvious that the essay is actually not about ethics, it is about rights. And any discussion or any criticism of that essay, which does not account for that, is one that you can outright dismiss, because you know that these people have not gotten the essay and they have not gotten Kant's practical philosophy as a whole. So I just wanted to point this out, that I left these two things out: the conscience, which requires you to be truthful with yourself, and the contract on which all right, all law is based, which requires you to be truthful to others. These two are two important reasons why Kant rejects the lie, and these I will discuss in my upcoming lectures. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Leo Allmann, Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.